So I'm thinking about starting to do the introduction slowly, because we do have a long list of questions that we want to get through. And we still have one more panelist that we're waiting for, but I think, the introductions will last 5 minutes or so. I think it's okay to start, and then go from there. Um, so welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Daria. I'm one of the political education co-chairs in Philly DSA, and I will be moderating our panel today. We have a truly stellar set of speakers with us. I will be introducing them shortly, but first, I wanted to acknowledge everyone who helped bring this panel together. First of all, my fellow PolyEd co-chair, Echo, who got the project started and prepared the questions, and is going to be helping me moderate today. Our comrades from the International Solidarity Working Group and Philly DSA, Viv, Arlen, and James, and Amir from the International Committee, all contributed to bringing together our speakers, gathering endorsements, and getting the word out. I also want to thank Patrick, who designed our beautiful graphic for the event. We received a long list of endorsements, which is really wonderful. Delaware DSA, Central Jersey DSA, the International Committee, the Palestine Solidarity Working Group, the Anti-War Working Group, and Connecticut DSA. I hope I don't forget anybody. But I really appreciate everyone who has been enthusiastic about this event, and has supported us throughout the planning process. And on to our speakers. I'll introduce them in the order we confirm them as panelists. First is Seamus Malekafzali. Seamus is a writer and journalist whose work focuses on the Middle East and has appeared in many of the outlets we care about on the left. He has written for The Nation, The Intercept, Jacobin, Baffler, Protein Mag. You can find his most recent article, Axis of Resistance, in Parapraxis. I've personally been following him for several years, and he has been one of those people who I look to orient myself around current events surrounding Iran. So I highly recommend following him on Twitter and his Substack. Next is Yasemin Motar, who is a scholar and activist based in London. She is a frequent contributor to the Weekly Worker and acting editor of Critique Journal of Socialist Theory. She will be presenting anti-imperialism and the Middle East with Moshe Mekover at the Communist University in London around the first week of August. If you're interested in checking that out. Nima Zuccoloni, a fellow DSA member, received his MA in sociology at Johns Hopkins University. His research interests include economic inequality and stratification, class theory, and social movements. During his studies in Tehran, he was an active member of the socialist organization Students for Equality and Freedom. He's currently working on a piece about the internal politics and class dynamics of Iran, and I'm hoping we'll get a preview of that in a little bit during one of our questions. Finally, Professor Arvand Abrahamian is a distinguished professor of history at Baruch College and the Graduate Center of CUNY. Over his career, he has specialized in modern Iranian history and Middle Eastern politics. He's best known for his seminal work, Iran Between Two Revolutions, which analyzes Iran's political evolution from the constitutional revolution in the early 1900s to the Islamic Revolution in 1978-79. He is considered the leading authority on Iran's modern history, and we are really excited to have him on this panel. Mana Mostatabi, who couldn't make it today, holds an MS with distinction in global politics and security from Georgetown University, where she specializes in nuclear security and non-proliferation. She has over 16 years of experience at the intersection of policy and public affairs. She has submitted a statement, which I will read if time allows during our discussion of the nuclear program. I've edited it to ensure it would fit into the time allowed for the section, so please blame me if there are any issues with it. And a little bit about the format of the panel. Each question will be directed to one of our panelists, and then we will have 2 minutes after that for responses from other speakers if they wish to jump in. And we'll have a 10-minute Q&A section at the end. And you can submit your questions and comments to us, and we will do our best to get to as many of them as possible. So I think we're still missing one of our panelists, unfortunately. but I will have Echo contact them to make sure that they're able to get onto the Zoom. It's okay, we get started. How are our panelists feeling? Good? All
Yeah.
right, so I'll jump in with the first question. We wanted to first establish some context about recent events. So I wanted to start with Seamus and ask him, what is the latest on US and Israeli aggression against Iran? Where is the situation at the moment?
There's a ceasefire, but it's pretty uneasy. No one is under the impression that this is the end of the war and that a second round of some sort will be avoided. A reformist journalist that I've been following, Melad Alavi, when the ceasefire happened, he said that, of course, he was very happy with the fact that the war would be over, but he was upset that he knew that this wouldn't be the end of it. And that is how talks have been seeming to where things are going from here. There's talk about returning to the negotiating table. The foreign minister has been speaking about potentially doing that if they can get guarantees that the United States won't go back to attacking after the fact. But now, it's client state Israel is talking about, well, we don't just want an end to nuclear enrichment, which is still on the table. They're not talking about stopping all ballistic missile production. They're talking about wanting a full-fledged peace deal with Iran and the United States in which it leaves behind all sorts of hostilities, and obviously that isn't going to happen. So it's left in this very, very uncomfortable holding pattern. Um, right now, there seems to be this attempt by Israel to perhaps pursue a policy of Lebanonization where they are going to attempt to strike Iran if it moves forward to rebuild its nuclear program in the same way that it has been hitting South Lebanon anytime they see a member of Hezbollah even moving around. Um, to the degree that they would be able to do that without risking another huge war, that remains to be seen. But that is to say that this isn't over.
If any of our other panelists want to add anything to that, we can also take a couple minutes. Okay.
I'll just make a couple of comments. Sorry. I think I agree entirely with what was said. What is very difficult to predict is what excuse can be used for a new attack, because the Trump administration keeps telling the world that they have obliterated Iran's nuclear program. And we know that isn't true. But if they go to war on the excuse of the nuclear programs, that would be an issue for them. And on the other hand, I think it will also depend on pressure or decisions in European countries on whether they will add sanctions against Iran. And all of these are, if you like, the unknowns of the current situation. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And our next question was directed at Yasemin Matar anyway, so we'll continue from there. We wanted to ask a little bit about the last 10 years of US policy towards Iran. What are some noteworthy events that have happened in recent history? You're on mute.
I need to say a couple of words about 2001, 2003. The reason for this is that in some ways, these 2 years are the years where Iran's Islamic Republic tried to repair its relations with the United States. This was the war on terror. The Islamic government tried very hard to help the efforts of the United States, only to be turned back by the Bush famous speech, the axis of evil. Iran was one of the axis of evil. There are practical examples of how Iran tried to help, and the US generals admit they did help the efforts in Afghanistan, to a certain extent some of the efforts in Iraq, but it was rebuffed. I think in the last 10 years, US policy has had a number of swings, but there is a consistency as well. We had the Obama maximum pressure time, the diplomacy under Obama to maximum pressure under the first Trump administration. Biden didn't do anything. And then we had the extreme pressure by Trump in his second era. The diplomatic engagements are well known. The key events are the landmark Joint Comprehensive Plan for Action, JCPOA 2015, where after years of discussion, Iran agreed to restrict uranium enrichment to levels that was acceptable to the United States. EU and US lifted some of the sanctions that had been imposed. And this was all changed during the Trump era. He walked out of JCPOA. And this was quite abrupt. The sanctions that the US imposed on European countries who wanted to continue JCPOA meant that they all withdrew in practical terms, in terms of trade or economic agreements. In terms of Iran itself, it resumed its acceleration of nuclear activities. It enriched uranium, and we had at the same time in 2020, January 2020, a US drone attack that killed a very significant figure in Iran's Revolutionary Guards, Qasem Soleimani, who had quite a following outside Iran's borders as well. This was quite significant because for Iran, this was an attack on a senior member, the first attack on a senior member of the government, of the establishment. I don't think we can say much about the diplomacy of the Biden era. Some initiatives were taken to revive JCPOA, but I don't think there were some indirect talks in Vienna 2021, 2022, but there was no significant progress. And what we saw was a stalemate. During the Women Life Freedom, we saw some expressions of solidarity by Biden towards the protesters. But if you like, there was such a widespread correct and radical support for this, but there were also very dubious figures supporting this movement. So internationally, it was very difficult to assess where. I think for Biden, this was an opportunistic movement. And then, of course, we know the last few months, the discussions that were held in Oman and once in Rome for allegedly to resolve the nuclear issue. Now, the difficulty there was, given that it was Trump who walked away from JCPOA, it was very difficult to imagine what was being discussed, because he called JCPOA the worst deal ever. So he presumably didn't want to revive it. He didn't, at times he said he wanted to accept some form of nuclear programs in Iran. At other times, he said, no, Iran should have no nuclear industry. But I think the nuclear argument here, and I want to finish with this, is a bit of a diversion. Had Iran had no nuclear program, had there been no enrichment of uranium, the Islamic Republic might have faced similar attacks on the basis that it was dissing the empire. It was not at war with the empire. It was not. It's not even a very. I would argue not a very effective force in terms of the Middle East. But if you want to discipline countries of the Middle East, you can't have any form of disobedience and Iran's disobedience would have been punished by a US administration. Here, Iran as a large country, as a rival for Israel, is also an issue. The only countries that would be the only regime acceptable to the United States is an obedient client state in the Middle East. And for all its many, many faults, including repression of Iranian people, Iran's Islamic Republic is not a client obedient servant of the empire. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm going to move to the next question just to kind of stick with our schedule so that we don't fall behind. And this next question was going to be directed at Professor Abrahamian, but he's not here, so I'll just put it to all our panelists, and if you want to jump in, please feel free. What role have foreign powers like Britain and the US played in Iran historically?
I mean, the past 2 centuries of Iranian history have been foreign powers attempting to infringe on Iranian sovereignty, sometimes in more subtle ways, but oftentimes in very, very violent ways. I mean, the Treaty of Turkmenistan, in which the Russian Empire took territory from Iran in the 1940s, when the Soviet Union attempted to set up satellite states in Iran's north during that crisis. And of course, famously, when Mossadegh, Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, attempted to nationalize Iran's oil, and then Britain and the United States organized a coup d'etat against him. I mean, there is a reason why Iran's sovereignty is the only real issue here in terms of Iran's foreign policy. How does it affirm it? How does it maintain it? And making sure that that kind of humiliation doesn't happen again. I brought this up on the majority report yesterday, but I just want to reiterate it here. When Javad Zarif, the foreign minister who negotiated the JCPOA, when he came back to parliament and that deal was starting to fall apart under the Trump administration, that loss of sovereignty, that giving up Iran's nuclear program to foreign powers to oversee it to a certain extent, that was compared to the Treaty of Turkmenistan. These things are very deep in the Iranian cultural memory. And, they don't want to repeat that.
Thank you, Shannon. Anybody else who wants to add to that?
I think I can add a little bit. I agree with almost everything that was said, but I think I wanted to highlight the importance of the coup and basically, I think whatever has been happening in Iran since 1953 is in some way a consequence of the coup. The coup, just to give like a general review, replaces a democratically elected prime minister Mossadegh with the Shah, with the dictator who rules the country for 25 years, and is basically the kind of a puppet regime for the United States. And in 1979, when there is a popular revolution in Iran that overthrows that regime, obviously anti-American sentiments are very high because everybody sees the government that was in place as a puppet of the United States, and everybody sees the United States basically responsible for the history of the past 25 years in Iran. And I think that is not very surprising yet that the result of this very, very high anti-American sentiments, different political groups in the early days of Iran after revolution, they were basically competing who is the most anti-American, who is the most capable of showing that they have an anti-American agenda. The hostage crisis taking over the American embassy, that was initially a plan that the leftist communist guerrillas wanted to do. That they basically attempted to take over the embassy one day after the victory of the revolution, but they were kicked out by the interim government. And then 8 months later, the Islamist students were able to do the same thing, and by doing that, they basically consolidated their power over the very fragile post-revolutionary government. And obviously, I think the rest is probably much better known. Since then, the United States has supported the war, the invasion of Iran by Saddam Hussein, directly or indirectly. It has put Iran the sanction. And as it was said earlier, I think any attempt to somehow normalize relations with the United States is usually not has not been welcomed by the United States. I think any attempts from the Iranian side to normalize have been seen as a sign of weakness. And at every turning point, some of them was mentioned, any flexibility that Iran has shown was translated as a sign of weakness. And the US has always tried to go back and try to crush this disobedient regime. And obviously at every turn, the reaction has been negative. The reaction has been, comparison to Treaty of Turkmenchay or comparison to many other basically memories that sound like a natural humiliation. I'm sorry, national humiliation.
Thank you. I'm gonna move to the next question, just to keep pace. And it was going to be directed at Nima. Can you speak a little bit about internal politics of Iran and why these calls for regime change are being made in the West?
Sure. I think in the internal politics of Iran, I would like to have a very kind of short review of the internal dynamics of Iran in the past 25 to 30 years. In the late 1990s, there was a reform movement in Iran, basically in 1997 with the election of President Khatami. There was a hope for reform, and this reform movement had many, I would say, different elements. One of them was some sort of a democratization in domestically in terms of economic policy, some sort of an integration into the world economy, and some sort of acceptance of the world capitalist basically order. And in terms of in domestic social issues like the issues of hijab, the issues of like suppression of women, women's rights, it was also a little bit of more basically liberal, this movement. They wanted to do some liberal reforms. And maybe more important than anything else, they really wanted to normalize their relationship with the West. And this reform movement, which, as I said, started in 1997, had, I would say, many phases. The first phase somehow goes from 1997 to 2009, and this reform movement is alive and around, and they participate in election. They have the reformists have many different institutions, and they try to organize people in different areas. They try to have like a women's movement. There is like a student movement going on. There are multiple social movements on the ground that are related. Some of them are related to the reformist movement directly. Some of them are unrelated or even oppose the reformist movement. But they were able to thrive in that relative political freedom that was created during the reformist movement. But this period comes to an end in 2009. There's an election, and then the reformist candidate believes that he has won, and then his supporters come to the streets, and basically things become take a like big turning point, and the reform movement is not so much like a very peaceful electoral movement anymore. Like they have brought their forces to the streets, and the Iranian regime sees as like a threat and starts to basically suppress the movement. And then there is like a couple of years of basically decline of any protests, and then the next turning point is in 2013 when President Rouhani is elected, and many reformists see him as a reformist, although not all of them agree because he wasn't really like a reformist, he was like a moderate figure. And among the elements of the reform movements that I mentioned earlier, he's not that much keen on democracy. He is not even that much really serious about like social issues, social freedoms, but he's very, very committed to joining the global capitalist order, basically, and try to join the global economy. And maybe more importantly, he's very, very committed to the normalization of relations with the West. And obviously not everybody who was like a supporter of the reformist movement was happy, but I would say a big majority of people supported him. And these people were, unlike the base of the reformer movement, which was more, I would say, broader and had like base in different social classes. The supporters of Rouhani were more like middle class, secular middle class Iranians whose ultimate goal was to normalize relationship with the West and join the global community of their peers, basically. Um, and they vote for him twice, and they really believe that he can normalize relationship with the West. But that obviously doesn't happen just because, as was mentioned, in 2015 there was an agreement reached between Iran and the West, JCPOA, and everything looked like it looked like the things are going to be going well, and Iran will be able to normalize relations with the West. But with the election of Donald Trump, things changed dramatically, and Trump comes out of the Iran deal, and basically any hope for normalization collapses, and any belief in what President Rouhani was doing also collapses. And this is a very, I would say, this is a very strange turning point in terms of Iranian internal politics, because the people who were supportive of movement of reformist movement, and they were supportive of President Rouhani, and they claim that they are pro-democracy, they want to have like a democratic change in Iran. They overnight they lost their hopes in reform movement, and they thought that they came come to the conclusion the only way that we can have a change in Iran is by some sort of a regime change. And for them, even they didn't even have a clear idea what this regime change is or how it could be really achieved. I mean, they would use this very, very strange term in Persian, barandazi, which is like overthrowing, which doesn't have any meaning. It doesn't have any very clear political meaning. Like, what is overthrowing? Are you talking about the revolution? Are you talking about the coup? Are you talking about the regime change? And I think the answer for these people was, I don't know, whichever works. And my only goal is to see that the government of Iran is not in this antagonistic relation with the West, because we, as middle class secular people of Iran, we want to be a member of the global community. I would say this is a kind of a betrayal of the movement for democracy by this middle class, and that's basically changed everything. Since then, there has been a widespread belief that there is no way that this regime can be reformed, and we have to go for this overthrowing. And again, no one actually knows what the overthrowing is. Some people think that sanctioning Iranian government is a good idea because it will weaken the government, and it will and eventually the government will collapse. When social protests like women life freedom happen, although those protests are massive and they're real social movements, and they actually have achieved a lot of I would say have achieved a lot in terms of social change, changing the social norms about hijab. But they see all of those movements as revolution. In other words, I think the Iranian middle class, especially those who are sitting abroad, they are looking at everything that is happening in Iran as a kind of a fantastic revolution that they would like to see, and they would never, I think they would never see. And some of them even go further, and they openly call for like a military intervention, especially people who were around the former crown prince Reza Pahlavi. Some of them would openly say that the only way that we can get rid of this government was was basically a military campaign. And I think the reason is clear, because they see that there is no way that they can like organize people. There is no way that they can basically achieve what they want through a popular means. And because they don't see it, they have to sooner or later somehow resort to getting some help from a foreign government. And this has been, in my view, a very tragic change, which has, again, kind of made the internal change impossible, and also has alienated the Iranian middle class what they want, especially the Iranian in diaspora, from the real popular demands of Iran. I would like to finish with saying that there seems to be a change happening now after this war, that many people who naively believe that a foreign intervention would help the government collapse and would bring a very, very rosy transition, they saw a glimpse of what a war could bring to Iran and what could happen. And it seems like things are happening, and I'm really hopeful that things actually change into a different direction.
Thank you. If anybody wants to do maybe like a short 2-minute response, please go ahead.
I'll
Yes.
just say very briefly, I think one thing that we have to remember is that this government is not the way it's presented by US and UK. It's multidimensional. It has many factions, not just two factions, and it works through networks. And these networks don't fall easily with the type of tactics, strategies that Israel was following. Israel was following a decapitation policy in that it was thinking that by killing various individuals, the regime would be toppled. And they were also under the false impression that Reza Pahlavi actually had far more support inside Iran than what he really has. Bots, propaganda that echoes their own propaganda doesn't mean much. And the bubble of this Reza Pahlavi supporters fell very quickly. But the main reason is that these networks can reorganize themselves, can come back to power. And that is exactly what the Islamic Republic has done with the kind of assassinations. These were assassinations. You can't put a different word to it. Assassination of various people. And here, exactly as Nima was saying, as much as people don't like the government, they don't like a foreign power taking action against individuals. That's the dividing line.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm going to move on to Seamus. We also wanted to ask a little bit about the monarchists. Tell us a little bit about what role they play in Iranian politics domestically and also abroad.
Monarchism is a much more active thing out in the diaspora. It's still a minority position, but it is very, very vocal, and it has such prominence because it is very, very influential in the media. There is a plethora of very outwardly monarchist satellite channels that are beamed into Iran that Iranian viewers can watch. Iran International is a massive news channel that is funded by Saudi Arabia, channels like Manoto as well. Um, Both of those offer a very sanitized idea of what the monarchy was. They feature a lot of monarchist guests. A lot of the reporters are monarchists. Even when they're more, I don't want to say neutral because these are American state-funded organs, but like Voice of America Farsi, which attempted to have a more neutral way of going about things, they still had monarchist hosts on their team. Famously, there used to be a John Stewart of Iran, Kombiz Hosseini, who was very friendly to the Shah. And when he went off to Iran International, he became very sympathetic to the Israel's war effort. Um, there have been numerous attempts by the monarchists to create different governments in exile, to make different opposition coalitions. There was an attempt during the Masa Amini protests with Masih Ali-Nejad, Kurdish officials, different opposition figures from a bunch of different political alignments, and it all fell apart primarily because Reza Pahlavi could not stand for any situation in which he wasn't front and center. And that discord continues throughout all kinds of different parties, all kinds of different coalitions, and it results in a movement that is unable to truly affect things on the ground domestically. Um, the proliferation of these satellite channels, it promotes a lot of nostalgia domestically inside Iran, but to the extent that that nostalgia for the 70s, for the 60s, so that translates into um, trying to demand the return of absolute monarchy, constitutional monarchy under the Shahzadeh. I haven't seen that. Um, during the course of this war, after him and his allies continuously said, well, we don't actually support an Israeli war, we don't support foreign intervention, this should come from the ground up, any sort of uprising. When that war happened and Reza Pahlavi did televised speeches, he did press conferences, and he called on Iranian soldiers to rise up, he called on the people, there's no greater opportunity to take than now. There was zero mobilization for Pahlavi. There was none. There was absolutely none. The most was that there were videos that were sent to Iran International of people inside their own houses saying that they wanted Israel to win, and there was nothing on the street. So it's a very lopsided relationship. But the reason why we hear so much about Reza Pahlavi is because of how influential he is within the diaspora media and also how much he is accepted as a figure within the Western media.
Thank you. We definitely have a couple minutes for responses if anybody wants to jump in.
I would just like to add a fun fact alongside what Seamus was saying, that Mr. Pahlavi was posting various things on his social media during the 12 wars, and somebody had done something I would say kind of funny. I'm not a big fan of doing political analysis based on likes and shares and stuff, but it's something, it tells you something. That one of his posts was liked by something about like 15,000 people. And the next post, which was the day after, was liked by 14,000 people. The point is that the next post was posted when the internet was shut down in Iran, and basically that just shows that the overwhelming majority of people who like him or support him are sitting abroad.
That is really funny. That's great. So thank you for that. The next section, we want to start getting into energy politics and the subject of imperialism. And the first question we wanted to ask was, what role does oil play in Iran's domestic economy and in the global economy? We wanted to direct this question to Yasin and Matar.
Thanks. First of all, British imperialism's interest in Iran started because of its proximity to India. It was very important as a place to base your troops, to have rests in traveling to India and so on. And it was during these periods in the early 20th centuries that a man called Darcy realized the potential oil resources in Iran. British imperialism seized Iran's oil, established a company called the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, now BP, which was sold to the local people when it became BP as Benzina Pars, as if it was Iranian. It was extracting massive profits while Iranians who worked for it or had any, in general, lived in poverty. This question of natural resources was very important to many people, and as it has already been mentioned, the election of Prime Minister Mossadegh, who nationalized the oil in 1951, was the culmination of years of struggle. A couple of other dates to remember. 1921 is when the British helped the coups that eventually brought to power Reza Pahlavi, the grandfather of the current pretender to the throne. 1941, they threw him out unceremoniously, put him on a boat. This was partly because he was supporting Germany's war efforts. There are debates on how fascist he was, or was that a pragmatic reason why he was supporting Hitler. But anyway, the Allies, so to speak, deposed him and put his son into power. And yet in 1953, because they didn't like Mossadegh, because of the nationalization of oil, they did another coup, this one CIA and MI6, to bring back Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the father of the current pretender. For Iran, I think oil is not just a commodity, it's the livelihood of the economy. It plays an important part in the revenue of the nation. Depending on different times and depending on sanctions, it provides between 30 to 50% of the government's budget revenue. And it funds a lot of national expenses, from public sector subsidies to salaries to infrastructure and the vast security apparatus that exists in the system. That is why Iran is often called a rentier state. Hydrocarbons make up over 60% of Iran's total export earning. At times, this is even higher. It dwarfs agriculture and manufacturing. And it also provides Iran with hard currency, whether it's nowadays euros or yuan, the Chinese currency. In many ways, the rentier characteristics of the Iranian government makes it far more prone to US sanctions or Western European sanctions, because export plummet. For example, if you compare 2018 export of Iranian oil, 2.5 million barrels per day was the 2012 figure. In 2018, it fell to 0.5 million barrels a day. This is a serious effect on government revenue. It created chronic budget deficit, it created inflation and the currency collapse. In terms of problems that it creates, it does foster corruption, unfortunately, because it's a single product country. It makes the economy very much hostile to volatile global oil prices. And this has been the case throughout the last 50 years, 60 years probably. It also means that when sanctions occur, it's not just the export of oil, but the failures in the investments of the oil infrastructure. So at the moment, there is a lot of complaint inside Iran that the oil infrastructure is aging, it's inefficient, and it's therefore costs higher to extract oil and then sell it rather than what it can do. In terms of Iran's global oil position, Iran holds the fourth largest proven oil reserves and the second largest natural gas reserves. That is really quite significant. It does make it, if you like, an energy unique in terms of energy. When it can export, it can survive very well, but when it loses the market share, the impact is very serious. So now Iran relies heavily on discounted sale of oil, primarily to China, and to a lesser extent through a network of shadow networks to other countries, but all of them at far less reduced price to what it can sell. Here, the US policy should be considered. I think for the United States, the issue isn't necessarily just control of Iranian oil, as opposed to stopping Iran selling cheap oil to China. That is a very important factor in US geopolitical looks when it comes to Iran's Islamic Republic, but also to any country that will follow this regime. It would not make any difference. Globally, the aim is to increase the cost of oil for China, because that will change that will help the current economic competition.
Thank you. That is really interesting. makes a ton of sense, actually. So, and it's very close to the next question we had. We wanted to ask it to Professor Abrahamian first, but he seems to have had some difficulties getting onto the Zoom that we haven't been able to resolve, unfortunately. So I'll just ask, generally, we can continue the current question or like move more towards this next question. How does Iran relate to other oil producing countries in the Gulf, like Qatar, UAE, Saudis, and also to the major oil consuming countries like US and China and others?
I can speak a little bit about how Iran relates to other countries in the Gulf. There used to be a much more confrontational relationship, especially after in the mid 2010s when the Shia scholar, the Saudi Shia scholar Nimr al-Nimr was executed, and in response, the Saudi embassy in Tehran was stormed, torched, and then destroyed by protesters. I mean, after that, MBS was talking about how they needed to bring the war to Iranian shores, that it wouldn't be fought inside Saudi Arabia. There was the dispute with Qatar and its relationship with Iran, where they were suggesting shooting down Qatar Airways planes and making Qatar into an island. Um, but after things cooled down, and there was a recognition that the Islamic Republic was not going anywhere, especially after the Massa Amini protests, um, Iran has attempted to pursue much more of a stabilizing relationship. I mean, give an example, a key example here from the current nuclear negotiations, at least the negotiations before the war happened. One of the solutions that Iran proposed was that, okay, Saudi Arabia wants a civilian nuclear program. Other countries in the Gulf want nuclear programs. UAE has a nuclear program already. What if we were to make this into an enrichment consortium wherein Iran enriches uranium inside the country, but the uranium is shared, it's enriched as a group, we all work together, and that that regional stability is affirmed. But the United States does not want to tolerate that. When that consortium idea was suggested, the United States was apparently receptive, Woodcock was receptive, but then the caveat was introduced that actually you can enrich this uranium, you can do all that work, but you cannot enrich any of the uranium inside Iran. It can be sent into Iran after the fact, but everything has to happen off-site in a third country. So that sort of stable relationship is is tolerated by the United States, but they would really like it to not be the case. They would like it to return to the case in which Saudi Arabia was more confrontational when the UAE was more confrontational.
Thank you.
Can I add something? Just,
Oh, yeah,
just a
please.
brief comment. I think Gaza has also changed the situation in that all of these countries are doing absolutely nothing, and they are complicit in the genocide in some way because they're not doing that. But they are very conscious of their own population. Their population is seriously opposed to what is going on in Gaza. And you can hear bin Salman saying this openly. He, in one interview, said, I don't care about Palestine, but my people in my country do. That's true of Qatar and UAE. And precisely because of that, I think there is a dynamic that forces these people to talk to Iran, because Iran has done a great publicity affair in the ordinary people of all of these countries. You can't deny that. They all see Iran as the savior. Mistaken, in my opinion, by the way.
Thank you. The next question we have moves towards the nuclear power issue. We wanted to ask, what is the history of nuclear power generation in Iran, and why is this an important goal for them? We wanted to ask Ms. Motar about this.
Sorry, yes, I'll have a go. So Iran's nuclear program actually started in the 1950s during Mohammad Reza Pahlavi's time. It was supported by the United States. It was the climate of the Cold War, remember? And for the United States, this was claimed to be atoms for peace. which was to provide nuclear technology for its allies. So in 1967, Iran received its first nuclear reactor, and a similar research reactor was set up in Tehran. In the 1970s, again, the Shah had lots of ambitions. He wanted to build 20 nuclear power reactors. Germany, in the firm for Siemens, and France got involved, and the Bushehr nuclear power plant was established with German help. However, all of this changed in 1979 because no longer the client subservient Shah was in power. Western government pulled out. And then during the Iran-Iraq war, Saddam attacked, damaged Iran's Bushehr plant quite seriously, far more than, if I understand it correctly, far more seriously than what has happened in the 12-day war. During the 1990s, Iran turned to Russia to revive its nuclear ambition, and it was Russia that helped build Bushehr in 2011. This was. The controversy has been there since the 2000s. I want to keep emphasizing that this is a good excuse for the West to attack a country they don't like. It's not the real reason. It's not the real reason because Iran is still, even according to IAEA, very long way from achieving weapon-grade uranium enrichment. But even if it does so, it lacks the capability of delivering nuclear weapons. Iran has signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Israel hasn't signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and yet it has far larger numbers of nuclear bombs currently ready, available for delivery. The question remains, why is an oil-rich country going that way? And those who know about this say that for Iran, it's first of all a level of safety, that it can give it prestige in the region, but it can also give it a level of safety. However, others, such as Professor Machover in Britain, have argued that an oil-producing country might decide that in the long term, it is cheaper to produce nuclear power and use it internally and sell its oil outside, because financially that will benefit the country. I have my doubts on this. I'm not an economist, so I can't argue against this or for it, but that is an argument put forward as well.
Thank you. I'm going to pivot to read Mana's comments. I think we have enough time. It's mostly about the nuclear program, but I think it adds some things to what Ms. Matar talked about. So here goes. The June strikes on Iran's nuclear sites caused significant damage, but didn't eliminate Iran's nuclear capability. According to the International Atomic Energy Agency and US intelligence, enriched uranium stockpiles remain intact, and Iran could rebuild within months. That's because nuclear knowledge isn't easily destroyed, and the infrastructure is far from erased. Iran's nuclear program began in the 1950s with US support under the Atoms for Peace initiative. After the revolution, the program continued in a more secretive and defensive posture. In the mid-2000s, Supreme Leader Khamenei issued a fatwa prohibiting the use of nuclear weapons. Multiple intelligence assessments have concluded that Iran halted any weapons-related work in 2003. Iran has enriched uranium up to 60%, just shy of weapons grade, and has not crossed the political threshold of weaponization. That distinction matters. It's also important to remember that the Iran nuclear deal, which the US unilaterally exited in 2018, was the most intrusive and comprehensive nuclear monitoring regime ever implemented. And by every account, Iran was in full compliance until the US broke the deal. That exit not only eroded trust, but removed any incentive for Iran to restrain its program, leaving enrichment as one of the few forms of pressure Iran could still exert. It takes years to reach 60% high enriched uranium levels, but the technical leap from 60% to weapons grade is relatively short. Iran has not made that leap, despite having the capacity to do so, suggesting Iran is pursuing latent deterrence. In other words, Iran's power may lie not in having a bomb, but in remaining one decision away from it. That ambiguity is intentional, and any serious diplomatic path must account for it. Israel's program, on the other hand, is not under any international safeguards. Israel has never signed a nuclear non-proliferation treaty, maintains official nuclear ambiguity, and possesses an estimated 90 to 400 nuclear warheads with sophisticated delivery systems. US officials are legally restricted from even publicly acknowledging Israel's nuclear arsenal due to a classified understanding embedded in federal law. This double standard undermines the integrity of the global non-proliferation regime. Since the June attacks, Iran has significantly curtailed IAEA cooperation. The breakdown in trust is real. There are now real risks of undeclared enrichment or breakout scenarios, and many Iranians across the political spectrum have interpreted the strikes as proof that nuclear weapons might be the only deterrent against further aggression. That's a dangerous shift. If we are serious about non-proliferation, we have to hold all regional actors to the same standard. The only path to real regional disarmament lies in diplomacy, consistency, and mutual accountability. That begins by casting light on the full nuclear picture, not just the parts that fit neatly into the US strategic interests. So those were Mana Mostatabi's comments that she shared with us. So I'll move on to the next question, and then we can wrap this section up and move on to the closing. Our next question is, why is the US Israel I don't know what to call them, couple opposed to Iran's nuclear development? And we wanted to start with Nima on this one.
Yeah, I would like to actually start by saying a little bit about why at least some people in Iran could think of having a nuclear weapon one day. I don't want to say that that was necessarily on their agenda. I don't have any evidence for such a claim. But I don't think that it's very far-fetched to say that at least some people in the circle of Iranian decision-making authorities have thought about this at some point. And I think the reason is something that actually many different Iranian officials have said, that during the Iran-Iraq war in the 1980s, Saddam Hussein used chemical weapon against Iranians. And no one in the world, and especially not the United States and its allies, didn't say anything. There was not even a condemnation in the Security Council of the United Nations. That led many Iranians to believe, and by Iranians I mean people who were in power, not necessarily like people of Iran, to believe that if we are in this confrontational stance with the world and with the most powerful country in the world, there's always a chance that they do something really, really aggressive against us, and there is nothing in the world and no one in the world that would do anything to support us. Basically, they started to realize that they cannot really rely on international law for protection, and they have to think about protecting themselves in some other ways. Now, this some other ways doesn't necessarily mean having a nuclear weapon. They obviously have tried to build like a very sophisticated missile system, and they have been tried to exert power and deterrence in many different other ways. But I think they have always thought that having the knowledge, the nuclear knowledge, and having the capacity to build a nuclear bomb is something that they should have in their arsenal should the necessity actually arise. And over the past 20, 30 years, they have developed a very sophisticated nuclear program. And by program, I mean they have the power to enrich uranium at different levels. And this is not a knowledge that every country or many countries in the world have. This is only a few countries in the world have it. And they have tried to use it as a leverage in negotiation with the West. Like if as we was said earlier, in multiple occasions they have tried to normalize relationship with the West, and this is something they hope like they still may want to do just because they don't want to be under sanction, they don't want to suffer from sanction and the consequences of sanction. They have tried to normalize relations with the West, and at every stance, they have tried to use this as a leverage, basically saying that we don't want to build a nuclear weapon, but if you really want us not to go that way, you have to give us something. And that something is some sort of a guarantee that you're not going to attack us, some sort of a guarantee that you don't want to overthrow the government or invade, and also let us be join the global economy again. Let us like remove the sanction and let us basically be a normal country if you really want us to be a normal country. But basically, that means that Iran wanted to join the global economy or the global political order as a sovereign state, not as a subordinate state. This has been the reason that they have been pursuing nuclear program. And this is exactly why the US and Israel do not want to accept it, because they know that if they want to accept that Iran that has the power to enrich uranium or has the a capacity to enrich uranium, if one day they decided to attack Iran, they can go for like making a nuclear weapon, and then after that, Iran would be untouchable. And I'm afraid this is something that that was the reason that the 12-day war actually started, and perhaps this is something that will going to happen. I can only speculate, obviously.
Thank you. If anybody wants to chime in, we can do like a 2-minute quick response. Okay.
It's difficult to, there was a question in chat, has it benefited Iran? I think it's very difficult to answer whether it has benefited Iran or it hasn't. The reason being that I think it's an excuse. This is not the real reason why the United States and the Western countries, and in particular why Israel doesn't want Iran to have nuclear weapons. For Israel, even without nuclear weapons, a country with 90 million educated young people is a competitor for becoming the regional power. And Israel doesn't want that at any costs. And therefore, even if there was no nuclear program in Iran, I think Israel would have found another reason for attacking or for building a campaign against.
Thank you. We're gonna move on to the next section. We wanted to start talking about how the left should respond on like what to expect in the coming days. So I wanted to start with Seamus and ask what he thinks will be happening next, what to expect in the coming weeks and months. Yeah.
I think in the coming weeks, there will probably be a return to some form of talks. Whether or not they are treated as honest is irrelevant. I think they will return to some sort of negotiating table. But I think unfortunately it is going to be a repeat of what happened before. Even if they are operating on the idea of, okay, these talks before were deceitful. Iran doesn't really have an option of not going back in these negotiations with some element of good faith. And now Israel is really it's already massaging the president who allowed for them to Iran again. I mean, there are already discussions about America giving Israel bunker busters, giving them the planes in order to do this kind of action unilaterally. Um, Apparently, Netanyahu has already gotten some form of affirmation from Trump that if Iran returns to rebuild its program, then Israel can attack again, no problem. Um, Israel is already apparently trying to get Trump to attack Yemen again as well. I've said this a few times before, but Trump is really a president that you can kind of easily psychoanalyze, and he forgets things pretty quickly. He goes back to similar methods of thinking, but he's very suggestible. And he can very easily put back on this path of, well, I mean, Iran is doing something. Maybe we need to go back in there. They're trying to do something. He forgets these things quite easily. Um, I think a second round of a conflict is more likely than not. Whether it happens this year or next is unclear, but considering that Israel is, already making plans for ethnic cleansing in Gaza for a second invasion of Lebanon, I don't think this is something that is a long-term project any longer.
Thank you. If anybody else wants to
I
comment.
agree. I think most people inside Iran are very fearful that the war will start. They're saying when rather than if it will start. And the problem here is that in some ways, it will the whole concept of regime change is now, I think, in the way they were thinking of a couple of nights of bombing and Reza Pahlavi will go back, is dead and buried. I don't think anyone seriously considers that. However, dividing Iran into lots of different countries is a possibility. And I think that has been in the Republican agenda for many years. So the idea of fermenting separatist movements in order to destroy Iran as a country will be on the agenda. Again, the problem they face is that people in Kurdistan during the 12-day war were saying, we are Iranian Kurds. We are not going to support Israel. I know some Kurdish leaders support Netanyahu, but I think there is a difference between turning that silly leadership, that corrupt leadership, to actual movements for separation is going to be very difficult. So it will be the entire Iranian people who will suffer.
If I may add a few sentences, I agree with Seamus and Yasmin that there will be a resumption of war at some point. I don't think it's going to happen like in the next few weeks or even maybe next 2, 3 months. I think it will be a little bit longer. One reason that I believe that it's not going to happen in very early future is that I think Israel has basically played, if not everything, but most everything that they had, every card that they had. I think it's important to pay attention to this detail that the attack on June 12th, it was kind of an all-in attack. They didn't want to just hit and run. They just want to go there and get their goals. And their goals was obviously destroying the nuclear program and missile program, et cetera, et cetera. But they knew that that goal would be only achievable with some sort of a regime change or some sort of a collapse of the central government, basically destruction of the Iranian state. And for that reason, they used everything that they had at their disposal. That they didn't only use for drones, they use vast networks that they had built over years, and they cannot really go back and build that network again over the next few weeks or few months. Furthermore, even if the United States gives all the B-2 bombers in the world to Israel, which is, I think, in itself is questionable. Not that they don't want to, because of, I think, technological and logistic limitations. I read somewhere, I'm not sure if this is accurate. It's very difficult to have accurate facts about military, like very, secret military facts. But there are not that many of these bombs in the world. Like there's like 20 or 30 of them in the US arsenal, and they have used 6 of them so far. So it's not something that they can do indefinitely. And furthermore, even if they had all the bombs and B-2 bombers, the question is then where should they bomb? Like, as I think it was mentioned earlier, one of the maybe naive and stupid things that was in the plan by Netanyahu and Trump was that they bombed the only place that they knew for a fact that that Iranians are doing uranium enrichment. But then they basically allowed Iran to move its uranium somewhere else. And it's a vast country and there's a lot of mountain, and they can build 10 20 facilities similar to Fordo, and no one can know about them because there is no inspectors, there's no IAEA inspectors on the ground. So I believe that there will be a resumption of war because I think Americans and Israelis know that Iranians will probably go for making a bomb. Whether that is true or not, that's what they think. And I think on the other side, Iranians, just because they know that they expect American and Israelis to think that way, I believe that they would probably go and build a bomb. So there is a kind of a race from the both sides of who reaches to their goal first. The goal of the Iranian being making a bomb, and the goal of Americans being and Israelis being preventing Iranians from making a bomb. But if I was like a consultant to Netanyahu or Trump, I would be very, very puzzled of how to do that because I think everything they had at the disposal, they have used it. Maybe I'm too optimistic or too naive, but I think the US and Israel made a big mistake by attacking Iran, and they will pay a big price for that mistake.
I think we can all use a little bit of optimism these days. So the things have been pretty dark. Um, last question, and then we'll move on to the Q&A section. Our last question is, how should the DSA and the organized left respond to this continued aggression and to the calls of regime change? And it's for everybody. So.
Okay, I'll start. I can't say a lot because obviously I'm not in the US, but I think for all of us, Iranians and British US citizens, the enemy is at home, and we have to want to stop. We would want to call for the defeat of the United States, for the defeat of UK and European countries, and the defeat of Israel. I think that's primary. I think regime change has been from above has been delayed, but the wish for the Iranian people to achieve the demands that they have held since 1905, since the constitutional revolution, remains for a democratic Iran, for a more equal Iran. And those struggles, if it wasn't for the threat of war and sanctions, would be somewhere else now. So for Iranians, that demand exists and we should still encourage it, but in a revolutionary way as opposed to a reactionary regime change from above way.
This might be a bit thorny, but it is something that I was thinking about when I was on Instagram and I was seeing during the course of the war, all kinds of different infographics about the Islamic Republic and the course of the war and all these letters that got released. Um, I would encourage leftists to really think about class analysis and about anti-imperialism and don't base their opinions solely on whether or not, I mean, this is a panel of Iranians. That is undeniably an asset, but we're gathered here because we base our observations and our analysis on class analysis and on some variety of anti-imperialism, even if it's not we don't all believe in a velayat al-faqih or something like that. Um, like think about that. Don't just immediately buy into something that an Iranian in the diaspora says simply because they are an Iranian in the diaspora. Because then you lead yourself into reposting open letters from Jafar Panahi, where he says that Iran should give up its nuclear program so that Israel stops attacking, or that just things of that nature. That's more of a personal grievance, but it is something that I do think about, and I don't want it to repeat if there is another war, that we have to go through these discussions with people who are not within the national fabric.
Yeah, I think I agree with Shemus and Yasmin, and I think it's a very important point to raise and remind everybody that there are many Iranian figures who look like very lovely people, like they get Nobel Prize or they come to Cannes Festival or Venice Festival and they get very very lucrative prices for their movies, but they do not really represent the will of Iranian people. Just because of the reason that I was trying to say earlier, I think there is a very, very big departure from the demands and needs of the Iranian chunk of Iranian middle class and Iranian diaspora with what the Iranian people in general want. And I think it's very important for the left in the United States or the UK or in the West in general to do what it has always done when it regards to like imperialistic intervention, basically try to show that this is not the voice of all American or all the British. I remember a few weeks ago I was in a protest and there was a very interesting and beautiful slogan. From the belly of the beast, stop the war in the Middle East. And it's important to let the people around the world know that there are people in the belly of this beast who do not agree with what the beast is doing. But I would like to add another dimension to it. I think there's also kind of a little bit of a naive understanding on the left that Iran is this benevolent country that is benefiting the Palestinian cause, or is resisting the imperialism and everything. I'm not saying that Iran is actually not resisting imperialism. I'm not saying that Iran is not supporting Palestinian. I'm saying that what's happening internationally, it basically follows the logic of international relations or the international politics. But what happens domestically, it follows its own domestic logic, which is the logic of capitalism. I don't think anyone should be under illusion the Iranian government is a type of government that we leftists around the world can support easily, because it's not only suppressive towards women and minorities, it's also suppressive towards the demands of the working classes. In the last 10 years, Iranian people have paid a very high price for sanctions, but this price haven't been paid by everyone equally. A few years ago, when Donald Trump came out of the Iran deal, and Iran was facing a big budget deficit, they increased the oil price, the gas price threefold, I think, overnight. And there was a massive movement on the street. They shut down the internet and they killed many people on the street. They were basically trying to signal to the West, to Trump administration, that if you think that we would change our position by the sanctions, you're wrong. We will stand, we will manage situation. Of course, by management, I mean that they will somehow defer the cost to the weakest people in the society, because the richer Iranians haven't really got poorer. They might actually have got richer as a result of sanction. And even right now, I think there's a general view among some leftists that Iran will make a nuclear bomb and it will be able to balance Israel and everything will be beautiful and rosy. This is not my view. It may be a more like a balanced geopolitics in the Middle East, but domestically, if Iran really goes down the road of making a bomb, that will mean that the sanction will never be removed or never be released, and Iranian economy will never be able to have the path of a normal capitalistic economy, and Iranian worker would be in a very, very difficult position to organize themselves against the Iranian state and the Iranian capitalist class. And this is something that we as leftists cannot ignore.
Thank you. If there are no other comments, I'm going to go into the audience questions. So this one, we're combining two separate questions from the audience. What is the status of an organic secular left inside Iran? Are there any secular voices that can unite people for a future out of the Islamic framework? And kind of related, decades since the Islamic Revolution, what is the status of the socialist and workers' movement in Iran today? Are there any developments?
I'll make a start. I'm not an expert, but I think the Iranian left has been decimated. I mean, most of the victims of the earlier executions were the left. But if there isn't a lot of Iranians are secular. I think right now you could say an overwhelming majority of the Iranian population would be in favor of some form of secularism. Having said that, many of them are not on the left. The secular left exists, but it's very limited. It has its publications. It can print. It can translate books. Book publication is really no comparison to any time in the history of Iran. Classic Marxist text, anything is new text from left-wing writers, left-wing authors is getting translated. However, organizing is very different. So once you start organizing for a protest, for a strike, you organize a party or anything like that, you will be hammered. And because of that, this existing secular left has to live a very balanced life. It can't go beyond a certain level of activity. It's very good that they exist, but they're not homogeneous, partly also because as publications, as websites, one day, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, one day they publish something that is coming from what I would call social imperialist pro-NATO author of the left, who masquerades, in my opinion, as the left. Next day, they would translate something from the exact opposite view. Now, it's good that the Iranian young population is open and is seeing all of that, but it's not, there is no organized left. The left in exile, I would say, and I came out as an exile with the Iranian left, I would say is just, we should not talk about it. It's corrupt in some parts. It's completely irrelevant to ordinary Iranian people. It follows the ideas of regime change that are, okay, maybe a bit better than Reza Pahlavi, but they are completely lost. So the exile left is, as far as I'm concerned, finished. I don't know of any. I mean, maybe others know and I'm misguided. Inside Iran, there is hope. Workers' protests exist, and this is something that people keep ignoring. Workers' protests have existed throughout the JCPOA, the war, the threat of war, and they will start again after the war because capitalists don't pay wages to people. People have unpaid wages they have to struggle for. The war itself meant that a lot of precarious jobs were lost, and people have, not everyone has managed to get back the incomes they had. And one last thing, sanctions is actually working for the government because people who have connections, people who are connected to various factions of the regime control the market, the black market. And that's why sanctions have made people poorer.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Yasmin said. I would like to just add maybe a little bit of a personal anecdote because I was one of the organizers of maybe the only student leftist organization that was active in Iran for some time. And it was very unfortunate for me to see that we were crushed by the suppression and the movement kind of got discontinued. And just want to reiterate that I think there was a moment, there was like a period in early 2000s that some reform was maybe possible. And that moment collapsed or closed down for a variety of reasons, but I think among them is a heightened tension with the West. I think as long as the tension with the West and sanctions and other consequences of these tensions are on the rise, it's extremely difficult for Iranians to basically organize themselves, including on the left or workers and women and other social movements. And I just want to use this moment to reiterate that I think that means that we should not be really fooled by some calls from like some people in the exile. I agree with Yasmin very much that there is no organized left in Iran, and those who are outside, they are whether fringe irrelevant groups who are, organizing themselves, not anyone else, or they become basically actively complicit in the pro-imperialist plans of the US and Israel and its allies. And it's very, very shameful. I don't want to get into basically using names and bringing name of the people, but if you do a little bit of a search, and if you speak Persian, you can easily find the name of people who call themselves professors, activists, writers, translators, intellectuals. They have all of these fancy names, and they cheer sanctioning Iranian people, and some of them even cheer at attacking Iran by a foreign government, which I think should be a shame for any leftist.
Thank you for that. Agreed, of course. I will do one more question if our panelists feel good about maybe stretching the time a little bit. Is that okay? All right, we'll do one more question and then we will let everyone go. Do you think Israel, USA's concerns of Iran's nuclear capabilities as a counter, are they using this narrative as a casus belli to achieve other regional goals, such as dissuading Gulf states from moving away from the petrodollar or hampering economic cooperation with China and Russia?
I can speak just a little bit about the notion of Russia and China. The other stuff I think I'll leave to other panelists. I think there's a bit of an overstatement when it comes to left-wing discourse about Iran's relationship with Russia and China. Iran supplied obviously a lot of game-changing drones, Shahed drones, to the invading forces in Ukraine. But that military relationship was pretty one-sided. There was not similarly game-changing equipment sent by Russia to Iran. And even though there was a pretty significant agreement signed between China and Iran during the administration of the late President Ibrahim Raisi, um, I mean, there's talk about maybe buying new Chinese military equipment and being able to counter Israeli jets in the sky with that Chinese military equipment, but that stuff is still probably years off. It's not something that can be really solved, I think, in the short term. And even then, I mean, there was a lot of flurry about, well, why didn't China come to Iran's aid? Why didn't we have a really close relationship with China? But Russia and China are very integrated with Israel. I mean, they're not as strong, they don't have a strong relationship as, Israel has with the United States, but China maintains very close economic relationships with Israeli officials and Israeli businesses. Russia still maintains this relationship, even if it is obviously in a very adversarial relationship with the United States right now. There's really not at the moment a threat of a total realignment with China, Russia, and Iran at the helm. I mean, there was just a story today where Putin is apparently attempting to pressure Iran into signing that zero enrichment nuclear deal with the suggestion out there in the ether that, well, maybe Russia can supply nuclear material to Iran, placing it in that sort of subordinate position. I don't, I Yeah, yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
I agree entirely with what was said. The Iranian government's wish is to have better relations with the West. And it has been forced to make some deals here and there, but none of them mean much. In terms of Russia and Israel, the relationship is very strong. I heard this interview with Putin where he refers to the fact that the largest Russian-speaking population outside Russia live in Israel. And that in a way would tell you what is going on. In terms of Israel's plans and the US's plans for the region, I think the aim is to divide Iran, if possible. It might not work, But weakening, degrading Iran also helps, because in the long term, there is this wish to go back to the Abraham Accord. Now, the Abraham Accord is currently dead and buried, given what is going on in Gaza. But if you weaken Iran, if this horrible genocide leads to the kind of movement of millions of Palestinians to somewhere else, if all of these work out, then the Abraham Accord comes back on the agenda, and then you would have this unified Middle East under the subordination of Israel and US politics. So that is part of the policy there.
Okay, I thank you so much, everybody, for attending. Thank you to our panelists for doing this with us. It's been wonderful. I hope that everyone's parsing from this with lots of new information and insight about the subject. Yeah, hopefully we'll do more of these events in the future. I hope we can also stay in touch with our panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a
Thank
good day,
you. It was a pleasure.
everybody.
My pleasure.